Hi everybody, Adam here. So I am pleased to announce that it is once again getting a bit warmer, getting to be spring, and that means that I can finally get back to only wearing tank tops while I film. I apologize for ever having strayed from the just and righteous path. However, today I am here to talk to you about whether audiobooks or physical books are better, and of course also just, does it even matter? I don't know why you would listen to me on this topic. I'm certainly not an expert on books or something like that, although I guess I did get a degree in English literature when I went to university, so maybe I am. I don't know. Point is, I'm certainly no expert, but here are some thoughts that I had on the topic. Before we get started, do not hesitate to smash that like button to help, of course, level up the channel, to help vanquish the dastardly evil YouTube algorithm, and of course, to simply help bless all himbos around the world with a magical boost to their reading comprehension. Also, as always, don't forget that I'm generally taking on new online fitness coaching clients, so if you're interested, don't hesitate to reach out via the link below, and I will be in touch with you. And then you will start getting the most jacked you've ever been in your life. So, of course, before we really delve into the question of whether physical books or audiobooks are better, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the relative strengths and weaknesses, the relative merits of each. So in particular, of course, physical books have that tactile feel to them. They have the fact that you can hold them, you can touch them, you can kind of establish that physical bond with them. You can do things like take notes in the margins and use highlighters and mark them up. That's stuff that, yes, you can kind of do similar stuff when it comes to digital books, but it really doesn't, come out quite the same. There's also nothing that quite beats the collectibility of physical books, of course, because you get to, put them on a bookshelf and admire them and see them regularly. Whereas, if you have just a bunch of digital books, they become essentially just sort of entries in a list that don't really matter too much individually. When it's a book that you really like, it often helps to have a physical copy that you can refer back to. I know that I myself fondly, basically have like all these old philosophy textbooks from my university time that, I can go back to, I can open it back up, I can look at all the notes that I took and so on, and that really helps me to remember the text rather than, just having a very sterile copy that I can read. At the same time, of course, physical books tend to be expensive and also just inconvenient. They require you to really sort of focus on them a bit more. And it's also something where, I remember when I was a kid, I used to go to the library. I would check out 10 books at a time. I would have a stack, so long that I would have to put, both of my hands under the bottom end of the stack, and then I'd have to balance the top end of the stack against the underside of my chin. And as a result, it was I could only take out so many books at once because there was just, a physical limit to how many books I could carry around. It's also something, of course, where carrying around books can be inconvenient. If you're going to be, using public transit or something like that for a little while, obviously digital books have the benefit of being right there on your phone in your pocket at all times, whereas physical books are an extra added thing that you have to carry around that can really add up. I know that when I used to go on vacation, I would have to make a bunch of space in my luggage for books. And even then, it was something where I would often just completely underestimate or overestimate how much I would actually end up reading. And so I would often bring, way too much reading material or way too little. I also often find that in order to read a physical book, I kind of have to be in the right mood. I kind of have to be able to sit down and focus on it, which is something that, is not quite the same when it comes to things like digital books. Now, of course, when we're talking about digital books, the next one is just ebooks, your standard, digital copy of a book. These have the benefit of being way cheaper and way easier to use. Again, they're in your phone, they're in your pocket at all times. Yes, maybe it is helpful, it is beneficial to have a tablet where you can really pay attention to it and really look at it. But, even then, I've done a lot of reading just on my phone. Even though it's a smaller screen, it works just fine. There's things where, maybe I'm doing some reading on my laptop. Yes, there is something that is a little bit lost in the process. You can't take notes with the same level of connection to it. You don't, again, have that physical connection, but they're so simple, they're so easy to use. And basically, you can use them anywhere. You can use them on all kinds of devices. They're cheap. It's something where I'm like, oh, I ran out of something. I need to, get some more reading material pretty quickly. I can just go and download an ebook, and it takes me, 5 minutes to get the next thing. I would generally say that I find ebooks to be sort of the best approach for all-purpose reading use. Lastly, there are simply audiobooks. There are plenty of services now that offer the ability to purchase and download audiobooks pretty quickly as well. And that's something where they're so convenient. Yes, they do take a little bit longer to download versus something like an ebook, but it's something where you can put in some headphones, you can listen to an audiobook while you're doing chores, while you're doing work, while you're doing something else. For example, I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I'm in the airport because I've got to stand in a bunch of lines and things like that. It's a great fit for that kind of situation. Yes, it is true that audiobooks get a lot of crap. They tend to be kind of polarizing. Some people love them and will be I'm so hyper efficient. I read 50 books this year because I could, read, so many of them so quickly because they were all audiobooks. And then on the other hand, you get people saying audiobooks are crap. You don't really pay attention to them. You don't really focus. You don't really learn the same way. And, I get that. That has a grain of truth to it, but it also has a lot to do with the way that you use them. So in particular, I find that, when you're listening to an audiobook, it is easy to get distracted if you're doing something else that, may take up more of your attention or time. So, for example, I know that if I'm playing certain kinds of video games that are kind of mindless, I'm just doing a lot of clicking, then it's I can, actually focus on an audiobook. But if I'm doing something where I have to think quite a bit harder, where I have to answer an email, or where say I'm playing a video game and it's it's story time, so I've got to focus on the plot for a little while, obviously that's going to distract you. And when you're distracted, part of the problem is that yes, you still kind of get the overall shape of what's going on, but you can very easily miss out on key things. And so as a result, I generally recommend audiobooks for things that are probably a little bit less important. So I wouldn't recommend them for things obviously a textbook or something where you're really sitting down, and trying to learn something hard. But if you're listening to something some pop science or some fiction, something where you don't necessarily have to focus as hard, especially when you're reading for entertainment, that's something where it's it doesn't have to have 100% reading comprehension. It really doesn't matter if you kind of lost the plot a little bit for, say, half a chapter, and then you're right back onto it the next chapter and you can kind of infer what happened. Especially, again, when you're reading for fun, it's read for fun. Who cares? You don't need to absorb every single little piece of information in every single book that you read. Generally, the point of reading books is to, sort of have a general perspective or understanding of what happened in that book. And if you really want to know, 100% everything that happened in that book, then what you will do is you'll sit down, you'll read it more than once, you'll hyperanalyze it, you will break it down, you'll have discussions about it with other people, and so on. So, yes, you can still do that with audiobooks. It's a little bit harder to kind of, be somebody who's I'm going to listen to the same section of this audiobook 5 times or whatever it is. But I think it's still possible. And I think that, we need to sort of get away from the elitist sense that books have to be something that you do only for the sake of learning as much as possible. And all that matters is that you get maximum reading comprehension out of it. So at the end of the day, of course, the real answer is that there is no best approach. There are different kinds of book formats that work best for different situations. I use audiobooks for a lot of sort of everyday reading, light, fluffy reading, things where I'm just I just want to read some sci-fi that kind of, is a little bit interesting, but I don't need to pay 100% attention to it. Or, I just want something to do while I am, grinding in a video game or I'm doing some cleaning in the house or whatever the case is. I use ebooks for foreign language reading. That's something that I find especially useful because I use an app called Link that enables you to basically import your ebook format into their specific app. And then it can help you do assisted reading, where it basically helps you with providing instant translations of the words you're reading and so on. And so that's something that I find super, super useful, and I tend to buy a lot of foreign language ebooks specifically for that purpose. Then lastly, of course, I just prefer physical books for things like textbooks, maybe manga, things that I really want to, have a lot of connection to, things that I really want to hold on to, things that are very important. Things that, maybe I just want to be able to look at it on my shelf, or things that I want to be able to mark up and take a lot of notes on. That's the kind of stuff that I tend to buy physical copies of. So at the end of the day, I just want to emphasize that people can read a book in any way they want. The goal of every single person out there is not necessarily to read a book and have 100% perfect comprehension and like memorize it 100%. Like that's not necessarily why you read a book. And so you need to sort of get away from elitism and saying that necessarily any one way of reading a specific text is best, and instead just kind of focus on the relative strengths and weaknesses, the relative merits of different styles of reading. And the reality is that you can embrace the fact that, people learn differently. People can, learn in all kinds of different styles, and no one of those is necessarily better or worse than any other. So those have been the thoughts of one particularly confused, sad little himbo. As always, I hope you liked the video. Don't hesitate to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, hit that little notification bell. As always, do not hesitate to comment down below. Let me know what you would like to see in future videos. I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one.